It's early July of the year 362 BC. Epaminondas, famous Theban general and statesman, camps his sizable army in the vicinity of the city of Tegea, while he weighs his options to deal with the political division within the Arcadian League. The League, after all, was intended as a countermeasure to contain the possible threat posed by the Lacedaemonians. Pressed by time, he knows that defeating his enemies in the Peloponnese is the only way to maintain the Theban influence on the peninsula. A pitched battle that will determine the fate of Theban hegemony is about to ensue. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends. As wars need armies, armies need champions. In the ever-evolving world of mobile RPGs, Raid Shadow Legends enters the fray with a new perspective. Free to play, Raid allows you to control hundreds of possible heroes from over a dozen different factions and pit them against an ever-growing world of threats and challenges. Explore, conquer, and even battle other players in a free-to-play experience of vast beauty and unimaginable danger. Join now by clicking the link in the description below, and not only will you be supporting our channel, but you will begin your quest with 50,000 silver and an epic champion to secure your glory. It's the middle of summer of the year 370 BC. Thebes' shocking victory at Leuctra, barely a year earlier, had essentially ended the Spartan hegemony over Greece. Theban general Epaminondas gained great fame and esteem across the country, but despite his remarkable prowess, Epaminondas did not grow complacent. Just after the dust settled on the battlefield, a plan for the invasion into the Peloponnese was made in order to consolidate the Theban newly won dominance. In late 370 BC, Epaminondas led an army to Arcadia in the central Peloponnese, where he encouraged the foundation of the Arcadian League and, through this league, the city of Megalopolis, founded in order to be a counterbalance to Spartan political power in the region. Moreover, the Thebans and their allies ravaged the Laconian countryside, directly threatening the city of Sparta, which had never before seen their enemy so close to its own front door. Though Epaminondas didn't attempt to storm the city itself, he still hit the Spartans hard by liberating Messenia, a region conquered by the Spartans some 1200 years before. This was a huge blow for the Lacedaemonians, as the Messenian economy and its subjugated population of helots directly supported the Spartan professional army and military dominance. Though the Spartans avoided direct confrontation with Epaminondas' invading force, Epaminondas still made sure to strip his enemy of any economic and political means that would pose a serious threat to the Theban ascendancy. Considering that Lacedaemon was already suffering from demographic decline, the Theban tactics had severe consequences for the beleaguered Spartans. While Epaminondas spent most of the subsequent years campaigning in the south, his friend and political ally Pelopidas was occupied with expanding Theban influence to the north, in Thessaly and Macedonia. While Theban activity in the north was marred by a few setbacks, particularly against Alexander, tyrant of Pherai, it's well worth noting that in the wake of Pelopidas' peace talks with the Macedonians, Pelopidas took 30 hostages back to Thebes, among them the youngest offspring of the late Macedonian king, a boy named Philip, who soon became a fond admirer of how the Theban state worked under the supervision of both Pelopidas and Epaminondas. But as the years passed by, Thebes had to face increasing difficulties in trying to maintain its dominant position among the unruly Greek city-states. In the north, Alexander of Pherai revolted once again, compelling Pelopidas to raise a force and punish the rebels. Though a good part of Pelopidas' army disbanded in fear as a result of a solar eclipse, believing the eclipse to be a bad omen, a determined Pelopidas met Alexander in battle and defeated his host. Unfortunately, this pursuit of Alexander turned out to be Pelopidas' demise, as Pelopidas single-handedly charged the enemy in a battle frenzy. He was quickly overwhelmed and perished on the field. The tyrant of Pherai had been subdued, but Thebes had lost a general whose abilities and dedication lifted his home city to the position of a leading power in the Greek world. Epaminondas had little time to grieve the death of his dear friend. The political landscape to the south was growing increasingly complicated, and it required his attention. He attempted to contain the threat of a now hostile Athens by undermining its naval empire. But despite some successes on the Aegean Sea, Athens remained a dominant naval power in Greece. Things were not looking good on the Peloponnese either, as Mantinea, a city-state member of the Arcadian League that Epaminondas had helped to establish, revolted and began lobbying other discontented poleis to oppose Theban influence in the region. Thus, in a matter of months, Achaea, Elis, and Sparta joined the opposition. Even Athens, seeking a way to limit Theban power, supported the Mantinean cause. Undoubtedly, the Mantinean revolt was the biggest threat to Theban hegemony since it had been established just under 10 years earlier, and Epaminondas was perfectly aware of this. He gathered and led a sizable army into the Peloponnese, hoping to discourage the rebellion city-states and compel them to recognize Theban overlordship. But as time passed by, it became clear that the Mantinean alliance was not going to yield to the mere presence of the Theban army. This was a dispute that was to be solved on the battlefield. Epaminondas moved his army to Tegea, an Arcadian city that remained loyal to Thebes, lying on the path between Mantinea and Sparta. There, upon receiving scout reports, the Theban army attempted to outsmart their enemy and take both cities while they were temporarily undefended as their armies maneuvered around. But as these maneuvers seemed to lead nowhere, Epaminondas decided to quell the rebels, marched his troops north to meet the opposing army in a narrow plain just south of Mantinea. The Spartans and their allies didn't expect an encounter with the sun already at its zenith, so upon seeing the advancing Boeotian troops, they scrambled to form the battle line. 20,000 soldiers from Sparta, Elis, Mantinea, and Athens, with flanks guarded by cavalry and light troops, hastily prepared for battle, occupying the narrowest part of the plain between two hills. Coming from the south, 30,000 men of the Boeotian League, supported by contingents from Euboea, Argos, Messenia, and Thessaly, under the direct command of Epaminondas, marched to meet the enemy. Despite the numerical advantage, the Theban general had a tough nut to crack, as his enemies prepared formidable defensive positions, refusing to advance beyond their line and thus greatly diminishing the power of the larger Boeotian numbers. It was an undeniable challenge for Epaminondas, who attempted to deceive his opponents. Instead of marching straight towards the Spartan and Mantinean line, Theban units moved westward towards the mountain, and upon reaching new positions, their left flank pretended to ground their weapons and set camp for the night, relaxing their enemy's readiness for battle. Upon seeing that the enemy had taken the bait and loosened their formations, Epaminondas swiftly ordered his men to turn right and form a battle line, roughly resembling the one he used almost 10 years earlier at Leuctra, with a greatly strengthened left flank. In such a formation, the Theban left flank charged at the disorientated Mantineans, while the rest of the Boeotian allies steadily moved forward in an oblique order. Eventually, the lines clashed on the left and battle raged. Unsurprisingly, the ill-prepared Mantineans occupying the right flank were unable to stand their ground against the local superiority of the Theban troops, who steadily pushed their enemies back, ramming forward like a trireme and killing many in the process. While the battle raged on the Theban left wing, strong Spartan, Athenian, and Elean contingents hesitated to abandon their favorable position and storm the less capable Boeotian units that Epaminondas held back. Only Athenian cavalry skirmished with their Theban counterparts somewhere on the eastern side of the battlefield. Eventually, the relentless pressure of the Theban left flank tore the Mantinean line apart. The Mantineans, upon losing cohesion, had no other choice but to retreat to avoid slaughter. Predictably, the rest of the allied line gradually lost faith and fled the battlefield. But the Thebans, though victorious in the battle, had suffered a huge blow, as in the ensuing pursuit to massacre their fleeing opponents, the Theban general Epaminondas was fatally struck by a spear. He took his last breath just as his enemies were running in disarray towards Mantinea. This was a bitter victory for the Boeotian League. With the death of Epaminondas, Thebes had no commander that could match his tactical prowess, leadership skill, and political foresight. The only man who came close was Pelopidas, but Pelopidas had perished in a similar manner just 2 years before. Without a charismatic leader, the Theban hegemony slowly began to fade. Despite their fading dominion, however, Thebes' adversaries, be they Athens, Sparta, or Mantinea, still suffered from battle losses, the effects of the prolonged war, and their own internal problems. They were simply not strong enough to impose their rule over any greater region of ancient Greece. The Battle of Mantinea ended with a favorable outcome for Persian king Artaxerxes, who spent decades trying to maintain political divisions within Greece, seemingly achieving his goal. But just 3 years later, former Theban hostage Philip, following the death of his elder brothers, inherited the Macedonian throne and began his ascension to power, building the foundations of an empire the Greek world had never seen before.